Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
All right, well, there you have it. Welcome into another Mental Advantage podcast. Hopefully this is another for you, the listener, that's not, I mean, look, if it's the first one, that's great too, but, maybe.
If they pick this as the first one, you may want to go. You may want to start at the beginning because,
right?
I mean, really, like it is a fantastic episode. It's just there's a lot of vulnerability and we touch on some real sensitive topics, but it's important to have those conversations and discuss this stuff.
I agree, Brandon. It's one of those episodes that as we were having it, I couldn't, like literally in the middle of having this discussion with Aaron Machbitz, by the way, who was our guest for tonight. As we were in the middle of the conversation with Aaron, I just kept thinking about, I really hope this helps just one person. I know it'll probably help many more, but it's a topic, that we get into on the subject of suicide. And I think it's one of those things that it is raw at times. It is a vulnerable discussion. And we say it up front because we want you all, the listeners, to know. I mean, some people, that triggers them in a different way. And so it's one of those things that if you are somebody who is worried about that type of content, maybe in a car when you're driving with, family, whatever the case may be, just know that is a topic of discussion of this conversation with Aaron. But I also think it's the whole time, it's like we are the Mental Advantage podcast. And part of that is the idea that we're going to touch on all of these topics that are associated with mental health. And we've done our fair share of, mental performance strategies, based on sports and business. But at the same time, we're kidding ourselves if we're not digging into some level of mental health, challenges that are out there. And this is definitely a big one.
100%. And it's not something to be avoided. I think, if it's a parent listening in a car or something like that, hopefully you would listen to it and then take it back and package it and present it to, your children or any loved one that may be suffering from depression or, bipolar or any type of illness that, could lead someone down that path of, a permanent solution to what can, with treatment and medicine and work, can improve. And, and Aaron talks on that. And, he says some very, very poignant stuff. And I think, he's a great guest. And, all the guests that are vulnerable like this, ultimately they touch something, inside, hopefully every listener, because it's good and it's still raw for him. And, and it's been 5 years, but it's still something that, that he struggles with. And you can hear it in his voice at times when he's talking about his sister. So, I appreciate everybody listening to this episode. I appreciate Aaron, sharing everything that he did, and it's a good one. It really is.
Yeah, and one of the big topics I think that comes through, or one of the points that comes through, is the idea of start the conversation, be engaged in the conversation. If that conversation starts around you, Aaron gives some really good insights into some things that you can do that will really help support the individual who started the conversation and to be present for them. So I think we'd be remiss if I didn't share one of the tools that everybody has out there, the Suicide Prevention Hotline of 988. You can text or call that number. So I definitely wanted to make sure we mention that. Let me tell you a little bit about Aaron real quickly, before we turn it over to this conversation. So, Aaron is a coach. He's a speaker. He's an athlete. He hosts 2 podcasts, Something for Everybody and Champions Adjust podcast. And Champions Adjust is also a mindset program, that Aaron has. And then he's also the founder and CEO of You Are Loved, which is just a great group that does a lot of things. Has some, look, I mean, he talks about this, but I think the idea everybody needs to understand that they are loved. And so Aaron, kind of tells you a little bit about how that got started. You can also find him at www.aaronmachbitz.com. That's AARONMACHBITZ.com. But yeah, I think you're going to get a lot out of this. And look, at the end of the day, the other thing that we talk about on here, because it's not all just about, some of the issues around suicide prevention, but is Aaron was a former Division I baseball player and a professional wrestler. So, Jackson Stone. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Lights, camera, Jackson. That was fantastic. So, but so really interesting guy. And I think you guys are going to get a ton out of this conversation. So I'll step aside now. Get your pen and paper ready. Here is Aaron Machbitz. All right. Well, from that introduction, now that we have Aaron Machbitz on the show with us tonight. Aaron, first of all, thanks for joining us, man. We really do appreciate it. I know you've got a busy schedule, and I'm sure it's the time you would probably like to just be like resting and exhaling from the day, and you're like, okay, I'm going to jump on with these 2 guys.
Well, anytime I can talk shop, I'm in. So it's all good. Dinner's waiting for me. So this conversation's the perfect appetizer, let's say.
There you go. This is the second guest in a row that's had dinner waiting. I feel like I get off here and have to go make dinner, but I'm doing something wrong.
I won't even tell you what's waiting for me upstairs. So,
well, Aaron, why don't we do this? The listeners heard there in the introduction all of the different things that you've got going on. But I think your story is such a unique one because you're talking about somebody that, was a former Division I baseball player, then dabbled into, I wouldn't say dabbled, actually was a professional wrestler for a while. But I want to start here. Your webpage talks about Something for Everybody, the podcast that you have, one of the podcasts that you have, and it describes it as this: the byproduct of pain and curiosity. So why don't we start there? Because that really, I thought that was a really, good kind of description of a podcast. So tell us about your story and where did this desire to be a mental health advocate and mental performance coach come from?
Well, it all really starts, I guess, with pro wrestling, because that's sort of where the journey begins. And, that's what, being inside of that industry, created a lot of different feelings, about mental health and things like that. So, I started professional wrestling in 2015. I came up with a pretend name called Jackson Stone. And then a little bit after that, I had this brilliant idea to call myself, or my moniker, my catchphrase, let's say, would be Lights, Camera, Jackson. So,
nice.
Yeah, I came up with it in the middle of my sleep, and I was like, got it. It's the $1 million idea.
That's right.
I'm the next
Move over, Stone Cold. That's right.
This is it. Austin 316 said, what? This Lights, Camera, Jackson. Like no one's ever thought of to be a pretend movie star ever, but I got it. Figured it out. So basically since I wanted to be a wrestler since I was 13, all I saw was these larger than life characters, these people who were portraying these unbelievable things in their athleticism, the fighting, the violence, sort of everything that I wanted to do, be an athlete, an entertainer, all of that. So Lights, Camera, Jackson. So I basically rearranged my whole life so that everything that I did was curated around pretending to show everyone that I was a movie star because I wanted to dive deep into the character. Now, mind you, this time I'm very young into my career, so I'm making maybe $0 to $30 a match. And like sleeping in my car, driving 18 hours, like doing everything I can, but using these resources around me, my sister's apartment, my mom's Audi, to try and figure out and show these videos that I was this pretend movie star. I was, pretty smart about it. But anyway, so that's where I was. And then fast forward a little bit. Now professional wrestling is my full-time career. It's my full-time job as an independent professional wrestler, making a little more than $30 a show, which was nice. I'm living in Philadelphia at the time. And here's where the pain portion of, my podcast intro comes from. I get this phone call while I'm at the beach in the Jersey Shore with my girlfriend then at the time that my sister had just ended her own life. And, I've said this so many times, but it's like every time it's still, obviously has an impact, which is good. I don't want to be desensitized to it because that's been a fear of mine also, that if I talk about it too much, it's, those feelings are going to go away, but they don't, because now my mission is around that thing. So that moment happens. And, few weeks, few months, all this little bit of time later, we'll fast forward a little bit through some of the early stages. I was continuing to go to these professional wrestling shows and pretending to be this villain type of movie star character. And when you experience a loss of any kind, it teaches you something about yourself, whether you're living in authenticity, or whether you're living genuinely, whether you're actually doing the thing you wanted to do. And I did actually want to be a professional wrestler. That wasn't really the problem, but it was how I was acting and how I was treating people at the shows, what I was trying to post about on social media. I was trying to talk about mental health and suicide and anything that I knew, which wasn't much at the time, a little bit more than I know now, 5 years after. And so when I went to these shows, I felt sick to my stomach because as a villain or a heel in professional wrestling, you're trying to get the crowd to hate you. And then I was talking to fans after the shows about what I had posted on social media. And then it just felt, it felt bad. Like I felt sick. I never really threw up before or after shows. I had some nervous poops sometimes, but never, throwing up or anything like that. But that time I was, because I honestly felt sick. So I had to reevaluate who I wanted to be as a professional wrestler, which meant reevaluating who I wanted to be as an actual human being in the world, and talking about emotions and vulnerability and mental health while being a professional wrestler at that time was what I wanted to be. And I feel like I could mesh them both because mental health is intertwined in professional wrestling. I mean, you can look at a long list of very, very tragic suicides and overdoses in the professional wrestling industry. It's very, very scary and sad. And so, the work that I do now is very involved in the mental health resources of professional wrestling. But so then I had that was going on, and I felt better. I started working on some of these things. I started really addressing my own emotions instead of trying to shove them away or push them away through wrestling or through trying to even help people. I had to address my own stuff. And then the wrestling was a relief at this point, and being able to talk to other wrestlers who might be going through the same thing and hearing from fans who are struggling and just creating that common humanity, which is the beautiful thing about talking about anything on a public platform, that someone resonates with what you're saying and they're like, yeah, I feel that and I see you. And that part is really beautiful. And then, I moved back home to Dallas. And then, maybe 6 months, a year after that, COVID hits, and that basically took the job away from me because you can't really wrestle in front of no fans. Right. And so immediately I had to think about, okay, what do I actually want to do with my life? I know that I don't really want to be a professional wrestler forever. I was sort of losing a little bit of passion for it because I felt like the other things in my life were becoming more important. And so that's when I dove deep into the podcast, into, developing my mental health nonprofit. And when I started the podcast, I started it as Jackson Stone, as Jackson Talks Everybody. And the original idea behind the podcast was to bring guests on and ask them only questions about me. So John, if you came on my podcast, I'd be like, hey, what's your favorite Jackson Stone moment? Why do you love Jackson Stone so much? Brilliant idea to enhance my sort of character, egotistical idea. Yeah. But that also got really old really quick. And the conversations just naturally turned into like, how are you doing? Like, what's going on in your life? How's wrestling? How's driving the roads? Like, how's your health? How are you taking care of yourself? And then, eventually I retired as a professional wrestler in March of last year. And then it took me all the way into the beginning of 2023 to like officially drop Jackson Stone, because I had a lot of fear behind that. Would I lose my fan base? Do people really care about me as a real person? Do I know who I am as a real person? And then I changed the podcast name to Something for Everybody. And so the curiosity comes from just trying to learn as much as I can about all of these things: personal growth, human nature, mental health. And it comes from, this deep sense of pain that I have, from losing my sister. So that's answers your question, I hope, in a nutshell.
Absolutely.
So Aaron, it's interesting, right? So from the standpoint of with wrestling, you're a heel, you're doing all this stuff. You kind of want to turn to a baby face, right? Like in real life. Mm-hmm. And you start making that transition. Do you find at the time of that transition that, because one of the things that we hear so often on our podcast, when people start to separate from that thing they did, whether it was when you were playing baseball or whether it's being a teammate, whether it's being whatever, there's this search for identity, right? Did you find that to be difficult? Because you literally, your profession at the time requires you to have this persona that isn't you, and then you get away from it. Like, do you find conflict as you're transitioning away from the wrestling piece?
Very much so. Tons of conflict. I mean, I identified as a baseball player for a very long time, and I loved it. But when baseball ended for me, I gave myself no time to grieve the loss of not playing baseball anymore. I just hopped right into professional wrestling. So then I identified as a professional wrestler. And for a very long time, I did not introduce myself as Aaron outside of the people who already knew me as Aaron, right? My mom, even my dad started referring to me as Jackson to his friends, because maybe he was proud of me. He thought it was funny, whatever, all of that stuff. And so that became my being. It became everything that I wanted to be. And that's where you run into trouble with a lot of professional wrestlers with their mental health, is because they don't know when to turn it on and off. Because you could talk to almost any professional wrestler or professional wrestling fan. They can name a moment in time where professional wrestling saved their life. I know mine, but the same thing that they love so much is also the same thing that's destroying their health if they don't add some of these practices and toolkits that you guys know as well, that I'm trying to introduce into professional wrestling to make sure we have a better handle on it. So my identity was torn, but it took me a while to try to get to know myself. And through trying to help other people, I realized I need to help myself and figure out, what does identity really mean? And so I don't think it's your job. I think identity really means repeated beingness. So who am I being? So how do I want to show up in the world? When I have my eulogy, or when people talk behind my back, what are they saying about me? They're talking about my characteristics. They're talking about how I show up. They're talking about my values. So that's really my identity. Yes, I love being a professional wrestler and a baseball player, and now I'm a coach and soon to be a husband and all of these amazing things. But it's really all of those things boil down to, how do I show up? Am I kind? And am I resilient? Am I compassionate? Those are the things that encompass my identity now. And that took me a very long time to understand, but now it's easy. Even when I have a not so great day, I'm like, okay, I still showed up in these ways a little bit. I can do a little bit better tomorrow, because I still have that athlete brain. I'm still competitive with myself in that way, but in more of a sustainable way. But that's how I look at identity now. And I think it's helpful for anyone, but maybe specifically for someone who has sort of dual things, where they have to be this one way and another thing another way. Potentially if you have to be like this strong, assertive, boss person at your job, but then when you come home, you want to be soft and you have to be, and you want to be with your children, or you have a partner you want to be soft with. Like, there's ways that you can parse out your identity that help you do that. That's not just like splitting you apart or tearing you open, like sort of I felt when I was pretending to be, lights, camera, Jackson, when I was talking about some of this other stuff. So yeah, that's what I've learned.
And that makes a lot of sense. And, I always say people would be wise to add presently to whatever descriptor they give themselves. It's like, this is presently, I'm a wrestler, or presently, like, I mean, because it's a moment. It's one of those things that we have as I'm a baseball player presently, right? Or in the present. So, I want to take you back to something though, because I don't want to miss this opportunity, because I really think that right now, unfortunately, more and more families across this country, whether that be due to COVID, whether that be due to just the craziness we have just experienced over the last 2 or 3 years, is suicide in general has just exploded as far as the amount of people that are impacted by it. My family has been directly impacted by suicide, in that my grandmother on my mom's side, she, died from suicide when my mom was relatively young. And you notice the way I just phrased that. And I took that from you and this is what I want you to start to unpack, is I was listening to an interview you did, and I was really, really impressed with the way that you described it as dying from suicide rather than committing suicide, because we've got to change this stigma that this is some sort of a crime that has taken place, like this idea that we are committing something. So could you talk a little bit about that, and maybe when you changed the way that you described it?
Yeah. I remember distinctly when someone corrected me on this. It was so my sister passed away on September 3rd, 2018. September 3rd, 2019, I was posting about her on social media, and I said, it's been 1 year since my sister committed suicide. And one of the notes was, you should say died by suicide instead. And immediately my knee-jerk reaction was, please don't tell me how to feel. This is my post. Like, get the fuck out of here. Upon reflection and like calming down and learning to, maybe someone was giving me some actual advice, I looked into it deeply, and it made a lot of sense. And it also helped me understand potentially what my sister might have been going through. And yeah, she wasn't a criminal and didn't commit anything. She suffered for a very long time from very severe depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia, and then ended her life. So I consider that to be an illness, just like anything else. We died from cancer or whatever the case may be. Now, there's a lot of different factors, and there's very nuanced, complicated things about suicide. I can only really specifically speak about my sister because it's the only one I've personally been touched by. And so when talking about her, it's definitely a died by suicide situation. And it's just better to say that in general, because you're actually honoring the person. Because when you get to that point in like the depths of hell, when you feel like the only way out is for me not to be here anymore, if you've never experienced that personally, thank God. That's absolutely amazing. But to know someone who did feel that way, it's an unbearable amount of pain. And they are not thinking about the coffee they had with you yesterday, their dog, their mom, the great vacation they might go on. They're only thinking about, fuck, I have to have this thing stop, and I don't know what else to do. And so they're not committing a crime. They're trying to make the pain they feel go away. And, they choose a permanent solution to something that can potentially get better. And so we have to think about it like that. And then that leads into this idea that suicide is selfish. And
right.
It's the same thing. It's not, because if the people who end their life are clearly thinking about the one person that loves them the most, they're going to see the light.
Yep.
And if we can catch that person in that moment with whatever tools we have available, or we've created a mental health toolkit to allow us to get out of those situations a little bit better, which I can talk about in a second. But when you get to that point where everything else seems awful, you're a burden, you're not enough, you can't see a way out, it's not selfish, because no one's thinking about anything. They're actually the opposite. They're thinking about, I'm a burden to everyone in my life. Everyone would be way better off if I was gone. Now, obviously, that's very untrue. Everyone wants you around no matter what state you're in. And the wake that suicide leaves is grief for the rest of my life. My parents will never stop grieving. I will never stop grieving. Yes, it gets better, but doesn't ever go away. And so that person is not thinking about that either. They're thinking about, how do I end this unbearable amount of pain? And they see like this is the only option. So when you start to think about suicide at a little more deep level, and you want to be someone who can prevent some suicides from happening potentially in your own personal life with people that you love the most. This is what we have to start thinking about. And we have to start talking about it in a way that's more open and honest to bring it out of the darkness. And it's not this like, it happens. Like almost 50,000 people in the United States died by suicide in 2021. That's like one is way too many. How do we do this? Right? How do we figure this out? And I think one way that we can start to play a role in preventing suicide. Now there's policies and there's healthcare and there's all these other things that a lot of us don't have control over. But what we do have control over is how we take personal responsibility for our own lives and our own mental health. So I think that a huge part of suicide prevention is me taking responsibility for that and building my own mental health toolkit so that I can combat and armor myself for the days that get hard, because life will beat you down. There's no avoiding that. It will punch you in the face. It will kick you in the balls. Life isn't fair. That's the way it is. But life can still be amazing and fulfilling and beautiful and glorious, but we have to armor ourselves. What are you doing every day to build yourself up, to build your mental health toolkit, to allow yourself to better handle the days that are coming that are really hard, the challenges, the setbacks, the flat tire, the job loss, the breakup, the death, whatever it is? How can we expect sort of those things to happen, expect life to be hard, create this set of toolkits and protocols that allow us to build this armor around us so we can handle those days better, and we can build more than joy and purpose and fulfillment into our life through sort of that struggle of allowing it to make us better. And so I think that's a huge part of suicide prevention, along with, again, policy change, getting people the adequate help, things of that nature, speaking about it more often, access to care, things of that. But if we want to take a personal responsibility for that, I think that's important as well.
We need to get you connected with China McCarney because he actually has started a mental health toolkit for his organization, Athletes Against Anxiety and Depression Foundation, and it's phenomenal. You two together would just be, a force to be reckoned with.
Absolutely.
You had mentioned, and one more thing on this, and first of all, thank you for the vulnerability and your willingness to share this, because I truly believe that you, as you just described about taking action and personal responsibility, that these types of conversations, the more we can normalize this topic, the better off we're doing for everybody. And so I really appreciate it. And on that note, you mentioned, and I can't remember if it was just reading something or one of your podcasts, something that I really had never thought about, but you had picked this up in one of your suicide loss survivor support group meetings. And it's this idea of a sense of relief. And I thought was such an interesting thing, because when you unpacked that, I was like, wow, I could see that being a case. But yet there is a little bit of kind of like, is it really like, so could you just tell the listeners maybe a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah. That emotion has the most shame for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was attending these suicide loss survivor groups, and maybe I'm a year and a half, 2 years into my, journey, and I'm listening to a woman talk, and she's telling about her sibling that she lost, and it's a beautiful story. And she lands on this emotion that she really had to come to terms with, this feeling of relief. And I was like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Your sibling just died. What are you relieved about? I can't grasp that. That doesn't make sense to me. Like, what are you relieved about? I'll take them back right now. Everything, no matter what. And then I think about it some more, and especially in my sister's situation, she battled for 10, 11 years, and there was hospitalizations, there was police being called, there was attempts, right? We knew. And my parents did absolutely everything they could with doctors and psychiatrists and medicine and everything. But there's this cloud that sort of looms over you. Like, could Could it be now? Am I going to get that phone call? I've gotten similar phone calls before. And so when I started to actually deeply reflect on it, I was like, so I do feel that also. Am I a bad person for being relieved that my sister is gone? And I realized it was manifesting in sort of in me trying to save the world. That's basically what it like. So I started this nonprofit called You Are Loved. And originally when I started it, it was like, I'm going to save everyone. There's not going to be another suicide ever, which is like, hopefully that's a goal, but I'll be dead maybe when that happens. But I think we can get there. Like, I think we can. We have the tools and the technology and all that stuff available. But in my lifetime, maybe not. But that's like not an appropriate goal for one human being. And it took everything out of me, but it helped me avoid these things that I didn't want to see, but it also made me feel like a good person. And then when I started to get more concrete on who I actually wanted to help, which was professional wrestlers, because I think that's a community that goes underserved, then I had some time to actually think about why I was feeling this way and sort of how my anger was manifesting. And it was because I was trying to avoid that. I had a sense of relief that I could let my shoulders down and take a breath finally. Like, I don't have to worry about my sister anymore. I don't.
Yeah.
You know, whatever you believe in, universe, God, like she finally feels at peace, and I can come to terms with that. So that emotion was hard, just to like admit that it's okay, you know? And so I think everyone has that one thing that they have so much shame and guilt around. And that was it for me. And it took me probably 3.5, maybe 4 years to figure that out. So don't rush your grieving journey. It has to come when it comes. You have to put in the work and the effort, and all that stuff, but you also have to be around people who can tell you where your blind spots are. And that woman, who I don't even know her name, and I don't think she knows my name, like changed the whole trajectory of my life.
That's amazing.
I may have never figured it out. I may still be trying to do the same thing, wrapped up in anger and all of these things. You know, the questions of why still come up, but I have a really good idea around that, and I'm able to sort of soothe myself. But that emotion was eating me up, and she changed my life. That's the beautiful power of these small, seemingly mundane comments that people could potentially make that someone's going to think about for the rest of their life, and it changes them forever. You know, that's why a smile or a thank you or a have a nice day or a how are you or a opening the door for someone, like maybe those don't seem the same as that woman just being expressing what she felt, but I think it is. And if we are able to notice and be there for that, it can change your life. It did. Like, I seriously don't know if I would be this free, because I love my life. Of course I would have my sister back at any moment, but I had to come to terms with that to be able to be in love with my life. And the things that I'm doing and the things that I get to do, having a conversation for a job. Like, are you kidding me? Like, you know? Yeah. So it's so interesting how, I don't know, things work out. I haven't figured out if it's like I have gratitude for this specific thing that's happening. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But not like, I can't say I'm grateful for the whole situation. That doesn't like click with me yet. But I feel grateful in the moments where I get to do this stuff. So that word sort of is interesting for me. But yeah.
But those are tangible things, right? And to your point, I think what makes what I'm hearing anyway that makes this such a challenge is, you know, we never know the people that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. So like it's interesting you brought this up. So I'm working out today about 2 hours ago, and so it's a CrossFit class. So it's like 4:30 here, 5:30, whatever. And this young girl, she's fairly new. She comes out and you can see like she's just kind of in it a little bit, and she's kind of feeling a certain way about herself. And I was like, hey, you're doing great. Like, keep it up. Just a little encouragement. Right. And one of my friends was there, and I'm running away. So we're running in opposite directions, and I'm running away, and he goes, hey man, way to be encouraging. And to me, I didn't really think about that it was that big of a deal. And I guess the point is we never know what little bit of encouragement that may be intended for somebody, other people might hear. Like it's just like the You Are Loved stuff that you're doing. You never know that if you're wearing one of your sweatshirts or shirts and someone sees, hey man, I am like that could change the trajectory for people in no time. Like it just, we just never know the impact. And so to your point, Aaron, gratitude is kind of going back to what John said. Gratitude on a given day, the ebb and flow of it is very dynamic, right? I mean, I don't know that everybody is grateful every day that they wake up. And I know that we hear clinicians on this podcast talk all the time about, hey, spend time in the morning or in the evening reminding yourself of those things that you're grateful for. So I would just encourage the listeners that just continue doing those little things. Try to be curious about other people. Be empathetic. Understand that you have no idea what those people are doing when they are not around you. And just,
Aaron, I think that's a great segue into your. Sorry, Brandon. I didn't step on you there, but I think it's a great segue into you talking about validate, appreciate, and refer. Could you share a little bit about that? Because I'm really struck by this validate, appreciate, and refer, because I feel like there's so many times, if we're all going to have impact, if we're all going to make a difference in this, trying to help, fix this issue, then we need to be open to figuring out, hey, if somebody's coming to us in need and we just trust that everybody who we come in contact with is probably hurting in some way, but at least be able to recognize when that moment is in front of us where, hey, we have an opportunity to say something.
Yeah. I mean, we're just equipping ourselves with the tools to have sort of these conversations every day. Like Brene Brown says, we got to get awkward, brave, and kind. But, so validate, appreciate, and refer is, from this company that, I partner with, Minds, and they came up with it. And basically it's exactly what you're talking about, John. It's this thing that we can practice that allows us to have these conversations every day and make them feel a little bit less awkward and less hard via this sort of acronym. So if we think about validate, basically when anyone comes to you with anything challenging, for students especially, maybe it's like, my dog passed away and I got 4 tests this week. I'm just really stressed out. Okay. How do we respond to that? Do we respond in a way that says, oh, that's not that bad, keep going? Like, no, we simply can say, wow, that sounds really hard. Like, I know that sounds like not very impactful, but simply just acknowledging the fact that you heard this person say something that maybe took a lot of courage for them to say, and they just want to be seen. They don't want you to fix anything because nothing can be fixed. They're not broken in any way. They just want to be heard in that moment. Wow. Like, that sounds really hard. And then that's a validate. So when people validate their feelings and experiences, that's all you're doing with validate. And the next thing, you move to appreciate. We all know, everyone listening knows how hard it is to be vulnerable. Now, vulnerability is very important, but it's not for everyone. And the idea of vulnerability is to be courageous and truthful. And you have to pick which people you want to be vulnerable with. Now, a lot of times we're sort of shooting in the dark, hoping that when we are vulnerable, this person takes our heart and nourishes it. Sometimes, yes, it's going to get stepped on. That's just part of life. But we keep trying again and we try again. And so when we do validate their feelings and experiences, then we move to appreciate. Simply just appreciating the fact that they told you anything that was honest. How do we build relationships? They're the number one predictor of living the good life. We build relationships through honesty. And so we validate their feelings and experiences. We appreciate the fact that they actually told us something real and honest. And then refer can be different for everyone. But really, you're asking them questions because people are more inclined to be honest with you after you validate their feelings and experiences. They're like, oh, okay, that person made me feel seen. Like, oh, and they appreciate that fact that I told them something honest. Wow, this feels like an actual safe place for me to maybe figure out what I need. So when you get to refer, you've built up a rapport with someone that all you do is ask them, hey, what would be most helpful for you in this moment? Like, some people will say, I just need you to sit here with me before class. We got 4 minutes. Just please be with me. Some people might say, I've been wanting to sign up for therapy, but I can't bring myself to do it. Will you come over and help me later? Some people will say, whatever. Like, those are just two easy examples, but there's a ton of things that people can say. And really what you're just trying to do in that moment is find what will be helpful for them. It might be hard because maybe they don't know what they do for self-care, or maybe they don't know what mental health practices they actually work. So then this is the point in the conversation potentially where if you have your own experience with this stuff and you've dealt with something similar, stress, overwhelm, anything like that, and you've had something that worked for you, this is potentially where you can drop it in. You don't want to do it early in the conversation because you're just overtaking it. You're making it about you. When they shared something like, hey, I'm feeling really stressed or overwhelmed, and you immediately share your experience, you're not validating them. So they just have been overtaken in the conversation. So we want to make sure it's a little bit later on that you've actually seen them, heard them, validated them, appreciated them for telling you. And then you're getting to this last step, which is really just a conversation, a back and forth about how you might be able to help them or what they might need. Or maybe there's a counselor on campus that they haven't seen yet that you could walk them to, or make an appointment with them. Or maybe they just need to go for a walk, or maybe you teach them how to journal or meditate or whatever might be helpful for them in that moment. That's what you're trying to get to in the refer stage. Now, if it's very, very serious, then you want to maybe call the crisis hotline or things like that. But this validate, appreciate, refer is really just for your everyday conversations, your everyday mental health conversations, because mental health is how you think, feel, and act. And so everyone has that. And we all are going to feel stressed, overwhelmed, or anxious, or tired, or worn out, or burnt out. Okay, so what kind of conversations can we have to help us feel a little bit more connected, to pull on that common humanity, and to help us find something that will be helpful for us in this moment that we could potentially do a little bit more often to be more proactive with our mental health. And so that's a little bit about validate, appreciate, refer.
Yeah, I love that think, feel, and act, because you're spot on there with that. And the more we can help people, I always say as a mental performance coach is, I'm not trying to get you to think more positively. I'm trying to get you to think less negatively, right? Because the science is rich right now as it relates to, if you just think less negatively, you're going to be further ahead of the game than this idea. Because I think, the mind knows when you're trying to bullshit it. Mm-hmm. Like, it knows if you can't, like, if you're a baseball player, for example, and you're, had an O for the last, 20. Brandon doesn't know what that's like, but I've gone through a few of those spells. But
whatever.
but the reality of it is, walking to the plate and being like, I'm a good hitter, I can do this, or whatever. That's not, the mind's like, yeah, well, where you been for the last 20 ABs, right? So you got to make sure that you are telling yourself, or catching yourself probably even more specifically in those negative thoughts. And so anyhow, I could go on a tangent about that, but I wanted, and I guess I've kind of set this up because I want to take us back to the wrestling thing for a second about mental health, and it's still along the same concept of, being there, just being present, appreciate, the validating and appreciating and referring. Your work with kind of what you were trying to get into with pro wrestling. I don't think a lot of people realize this, Aaron, but when you think about it, and you just referenced this a minute ago, the list of pro wrestlers that have either ended up in mental health facilities, committed suicide, got involved in, a drug addiction, whatever the case may be. The one thing that people don't realize, you think about it, is an art. It's a performance art, right? But you can't script mental performance, right? You can't script mental toughness. Like, that's not something that can be scripted. And these are individuals who talk about, as Brandon and you pointed out earlier, have an identity, but they also have injuries that are threatening that identity, and plenty of them. There are things that can, no matter, you were one of the villains, no matter what happens, you were probably mentally strong enough to deal with some of that night in, night out, just like hatred, like whatever coming towards you. But I'm sure that plays on the psyche a little bit towards, the longer you're going with a role like that. So how is pro wrestling doing as it relates to mental performance? And I mean, are you seeing not only yourself being involved in that aspect of it, mental health awareness or whatever, or other people starting to get involved in it with pro wrestling as well?
In the bigger companies like WWE, AEW, from what I've heard from my friends that work there, they have psychologists and sports performance coaches on staff to work with their athletes. So that's awesome. In the independent level, which is where I'm focused, there's no real governing body. There's no anything. It's sort of just a free for all. And so what I've tried to do is develop at least a few resources, one being a Facebook group. We have a couple monthly support groups run by mental health professionals, and we do webinars so that wrestlers have a place to go to get guidance, to get resources, to get connections. But so it's moving in the right direction, just like culture is moving in the right direction, because wrestling really falls in line with culture, because that's what we're trying to play off in the crowd. And so we've seen and more of an emphasis on our mental health and things like that. And so wrestling has taken that, but I don't think it's switched it to where, cause I think mental health itself needs a rebrand. It needs to get sexier. It does. It needs to get sexier. People don't associate mental health with optimal performance, which they should, right? It's the same thing. If we're talking about mental health, mental skills, mental performance, it's all the same. How can you be calm under pressure? How can you handle a mistake a little bit faster? How can you breathe more intentionally? All of that stuff is good for every human being on the planet, but we've marketed it so well for sports into mental performance that we sort of, people still associate mental health with like the crazy depressed person over in the corner who can't be dealt with. And so if we can flip that, like there's mental health conditions. That's always in a separate bucket, like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, OCD. That's totally different. That deserves absolutely the help it needs, right? But we're talking about like this everyday mental health that every person will experience ever in the world. And if we can make it a little bit more sexier, like I'm trying to do in professional wrestling or with organizations, to frame it as mental skills to enhance everything that you do in your life. It will make your relationships better. It will make you feel better. You'll have more energy. Your work will be better. Your love will be better. You'll be able to handle obstacles and challenges a little bit better. You'll be able to bounce back. You'll be able to handle the presentation because you know how to breathe and you know how to get in the present moment and be where your feet are and all of these things. So great. But we only use it in an athlete sense because we all look up to athletes. But how can I use it in an everyday sense? And I think a lot of people, you know, like Michael Gervais, who's an amazing sports psychologist, is pushing that into businesses, because I know he does a lot of that stuff. And he's trying to make this sort of sexy mental health reframe so we can market it a little bit better to the everyday person, to the 7th grader who could learn it right now, who could learn how that he could pay attention better in class by, you know, using some of these protocols, or when he gets a C on his test. What actually can be done? Is he a failure, or he just needs to work on a few things? That's where sort of well, better, how can come in. Why can't we teach that technique, or all of those things to enhance how people learn and how they talk to each other and communicate? And so in wrestling, that's sort of the goal there. But the mental health struggles in wrestling simply because being in the ring is the high. And when we leave the ring, I need that. So how do I get it again? Well, I need drugs. I need sex. I need alcohol. I need all of that over and over and over again. And now in my time, like it was pretty bad back in the day. And nowadays it's a lot better because people are caring about their recovery. They care about their performance. They understand their body a little bit better. The travel schedule is not as rigorous. But it's still hard. And there's still some things that need to be parsed out in terms of identity. How can I be this person in here as a performance and this person in my real life when my wife tells me to take out the trash and I tell her to fuck off? I'm a world champion. Like that can't be doing that, right? Just go take out the trash, or be a dad, or be the person that you know you can be, and also be a professional wrestler who's great in the ring and performs at his capacity. So thinking about those things, a lot, you know, how can we make it a little bit sexier to take care of our mental health? At least that's how I want to think about it. And that's how I've been trying to, pitch it.
It's really interesting because we do tend to find, and maybe it's just the algorithm within some of the social media, but you know, sleep has gotten a rebranding, right? Like everybody knows how important sleep is now, or they're learning. Hell, even hydration has gotten a rebranding. You know what I mean? Like some of the stuff, and I don't know. I know it's a very difficult subject for a lot of folks because of that stigma that people think, well, if I do this, then I am this. And it just, I love the fact that you guys are trying to do that. And I think that, from a listener standpoint, it's going to take kind of this grassroots piece of sexing it up, for lack of a better term, to make some of that stuff happen. But I'm hearing you going, yeah, why aren't we teaching some of these skills at a grade school level so that they realize, like, okay, yeah, I got to see, okay, that's not the end of the world. Like, let's use it like an athlete would. There are places here that I can focus and learn on the things that need to be enhanced or need to be better. But a C is not who I am. It's just what happened that particular day on that particular test. And if given the opportunity again, I might make a B or an A. It just, I don't know. Hearing you, Aaron, it really kind of brings some of that stuff into focus that I have never really thought about. The rebranding piece of it. That's really, really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something that we could do as it relates to the grade school level, because, whether it's well, better, how, whether it's just taking a look at asking the right questions and understanding that if by asking the right questions as a teacher, for example, you can change this kid's directional pattern from going to that fixed mindset path to the growth mindset path. Like if you hear kids, when we catch them saying things like, to Brandon's point, oh, I got to see, I suck at math, or whatever the case may be, like in the moment when it's fresh, being able to ask a question of, hey, let me ask you a question. Do you think that is, that kind of self-talk, that by saying that to yourself, that's helping you as a student, hurting you as a student, like just kind of starting to get them to understand even something as easy as E plus R equals O. And the idea of like, okay, this happened. What's my response going to be? And then debriefing on the day. Like these are things that I think that, and that's what I love about, and it gets me fired up talking to folks like yourself and, 100 plus episodes later, we still are loving the idea that there's people out there like yourself that are saying, look, we need to think differently about this. We need to do things differently. We need to find a way to either rebrand. We need to find a way to be more assertive at an earlier age, catch people at an earlier age so that we can get involved by teaching them the right skills and tactics and strategies at that young age, so that we're not having to do all the fixing or, helping later on in life because they've established, because we always say this. I mean, the earliest mental performance coaches that anybody has is the parents and teachers, coaches at that young age. So if we can get there, I think we're on the right track. Hey, and time, of course, is getting to us, but I wanted to, speaking of that, I wanted to make sure that we gave you an opportunity to talk about not only You Are Loved, but you also have you do some stuff with Champions Adjust. So, and I know there's some mental performance, kind of programs out of that. So just to maybe tell the listeners, first of all, where they can find some of your content, because it's really good stuff. And then also a little bit about Champions Adjust, which I'm grabbing one of those t-shirts, by the way. I think I saw that website and I was like, yeah, I'm going to have one of those.
Yeah, it's, I'll tell you how Champions Adjust name came up in a second, but I want to just comment on one thing. Like, I think one of the most important things also that teachers and coaches of young students can do is to praise effort over outcome. And so when that kid gets a C, you can simply ask, did you give your best effort? And he may be sad when he says no, but it's not a reflection of who he is. He just knows that now he can work a little bit harder. And so I think the effort piece and the outcome piece are extremely important. Then kids won't be tied to the outcome. They also won't be tied to love being tied to outcome. They'll be tied to, I know if I give my best effort, that's all I got. And that's the best I can do. And that's really, really important. And so, so Champions Adjust is hilarious, actually, how it came about. My college buddies, my roommates and my teammates, we used to tell each other that Champions Adjust when one of us wasn't drinking enough alcohol.
Oh, nice. That's hilarious.
And so, I got out of college in 2014. Then I think I started Champions Adjust maybe a couple years ago. And I texted my buddies. I'm like, hey, you guys got a good name for this baseball podcast I'm trying to start? And they're like, Champions Adjust. And I'm like, dude, So now Champions Adjust is like my mindset program, sports brand podcast. And it's actually a philosophy that I think now is like extremely important. Like, how can we continue to adjust and pivot to the present moment? Cause that's what champions do. It's like not this like straight line to the top, but it's going to spiral. It's going to move. Right. And as a champion, you adjust consistently over time. And so that's what it's become. It's become part of my mindset program, which I normally usually and particularly like to work with baseball players. It's just my favorite sport and the most I can relate the knowledge to. And I think it's, a very heavily mentally driven game, maybe the most mentally driven game. So I'm very inclined to work with baseball players. And the merchandise, if I do say so myself, is pretty cool.
It's fire. No, it's fire. It's good. It's really good.
It is.
Well,
and also go ahead, Brandon.
And Your Love has really good merch too. I don't know who, like, are you the artist, the graphic artist, or you have someone? Cause everything you got is really solid.
I'm not the artist. I have the creative ideas, let's say. And then my fiance's put a lot of it together since we got together. But before her, I just hired people and, they did great work. So
yeah, no doubt.
The Random Stuff Friday, by the way, too. I would encourage people to subscribe, get on and subscribe to that, because I mean, we're all guilty of it. I mean, it's why I think half the time people get into podcasts is to talk and learn from as many, really smart people, like yourself. That was what I was always told is, hey, you want to get better, get in a room where you're not the smartest person in the room. And trust me, every single week that we're on a podcast, we're not the smartest people in the room. But also, I think the other beauty of podcasts is there's just times where you just have a thought in your head and you just want to kind of go on a whole little thing about it. And that's what I perceive Random Stuff Friday is those moments where you're just like, hey, I saw this quote. This is great. Let me just unpack this for a little while and what it means to me. Which is, I think, really, really cool.
Yeah. I mean, everything, the podcast, my newsletters, just me being curious. I feel the same way as you. I bring guests on to my show and I'm blown away by, their grace and intelligence and the sophistication of their language. And, then I hear a random thing from my uncle about how he read this book. And I'm like, oh, that's a pretty good newsletter idea. I'll talk about time. And, you just like, I love it. I love being able to have conversations. I've always been one to talk. I love doing promos in professional wrestling. So now I just treat the hour conversations that I have as the same thing. So, it's awesome. So yeah.
That's awesome. Very cool stuff. Well, man, we can't thank you enough for joining us, and kudos to everything you're doing. I mean, I really do admire what you've got going on there, and I respect you tremendously. We've been followers of yours for a while. As far as I know I'd reached out to you a while back. It was like, hey, we need to find a way to get you on the show sometime, because we're big fans of anybody who's out there just trying to get people, to become the best version of themselves. And it's an ongoing process, but it takes everybody just, really being mindful of the idea that, hey, you never know when you're going to say that one thing, you're going to just have that one pat on the back, whatever that person needs that day, that's going to turn things around. And, like you said earlier, for you, there was people who made the right comments at the right times when you needed to hear them and receive them in that moment. And it's made a huge difference in the world because of that. And you've made a huge difference in the world because you're starting to affect a lot of change out there. So keep doing what you're doing. We're pulling for you.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
Feelings are mutual. I appreciate it a lot.
Really appreciate
Awesome.
your time and vulnerability, Aaron. Really, really do.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.